So let's dive in. Today we're looking at a foundational story, really about how you build a nation completely from scratch. And what's fascinating here is that the authority for it comes from two totally different places. On one hand, you've got the super practical advice from a father-in-law, and on the other, you have the absolute divine command of a God. We're going to see how these two forces, one very human and one very divine, came together to forge a nation right there in the desert.
I mean, just think about the sheer challenge here. You have this massive group of people who've just escaped slavery. They're out in the middle of nowhere, in the wilderness, with no laws, no real structure, no system to speak of. So the huge question that our source text is trying to answer is this: how in the world do you create a functioning society out of all that chaos?
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to walk through this whole process in 5 steps. We'll start with a very human, relatable problem. Then we'll witness a pretty terrifying divine encounter. We'll get into who exactly this God is, break down the core rules he lays out, and finally, look at the overall blueprint for this new society.
Okay, so our story kicks off not with a big, flashy miracle, but with a leadership crisis, a human problem. Moses, the guy in charge of the Israelites, has set up camp at the Mount of God, and honestly, he is stretched to his absolute breaking point. Here's the situation. Every single argument, every question, every little dispute, it all comes to one person: Moses. Can you imagine? The people are literally lining up from dawn till dusk. This is not a functioning government. It's a massive bottleneck. And the whole thing is about to completely fall apart. It is totally unsustainable.
And who's the one who points this out? It's not a voice from the heavens. It's his father-in-law, Jethro. He sees what's happening, sees how absurd it is, and he gives Moses some very blunt, very practical advice. He's basically saying, look, you are going to burn yourself out, and you're going to take all these people down with you.
And Jethro doesn't just point out the problem. He gives a brilliant, logical solution. It's really a masterclass in delegation. He says create a tiered system. Find good, trustworthy people, make them judges over smaller groups, and let them handle all the day-to-day stuff. That way, only the really big, important cases come to you. It's just pure, practical management advice.
And what's the result? Moses listens. He implements Jethro's plan, the burden gets shared, the system starts working, and for the first time, the society finds a bit of stability and peace. So this first pillar of the new nation, it isn't built on a miracle, it's built on solid human wisdom.
But that practical foundation, well, that's just the warm-up act. The narrative is about to pivot, and I mean pivot dramatically. We're going from a quiet, logical conversation in a tent to a terrifying, nation-defining encounter at that very same mountain, Mount Sinai.
This event is so momentous that it requires a full 3 days of ritual preparation. The people are told to make themselves holy, to wash their clothes, to get ready. The text is building this incredible sense of anticipation for whatever is coming on that 3rd day.
And right away, we see the core dynamic here. God descends onto the mountain, but a very clear boundary is set up for the people, a lethal one. They are warned not to even touch the edge of the mountain or they will be put to death. This is not a casual get-together, it's an encounter with an overwhelmingly powerful and dangerous force.
So, on the 3rd day, the scene starts to unfold. First, a thick cloud comes down and completely covers the top of the mountain. Right away, there's this sense of mystery and awe.
Then, things just ramp up. The sensory experience is intense. You've got the sound of roaring thunder and flashes of lightning. The text says the entire camp of people starts to tremble with fear.
And if that wasn't enough, the very ground beneath their feet starts to shake. The source says the entire mountain quaked greatly because the Lord descended on it in fire. This is just an overwhelming display of raw, cosmic power.
The effect all this has on the people is, well, it's profound. They are so completely terrified by this whole spectacle that they actually beg Moses to be the go-between. They're convinced that if they hear God's voice directly, they'll die. And that's the point, really. Before a single law is even spoken, the absolute, terrifying authority of the lawgiver has been established beyond any doubt.
So, after that incredible display of power, the central question has to be, who is this being? Who is the God that's speaking from inside all that fire and smoke? Well, the text is actually very clear in defining this entity. First and foremost, God's identity is rooted in a specific historical act. He introduces himself as the one who rescued them from slavery in Egypt. And based on that act of liberation, Jethro had earlier said that this God is greater than all gods. So his identity is twofold. He's a liberator and he's the supreme being.
The text then gives us a more detailed profile with some key attributes. He's a deliverer who carried them to safety on eagle's wings. He's obviously powerful. We just saw the proof on the mountain. He's described as both just, meaning he punishes wrongdoing, and also merciful, showing kindness to thousands. And finally, he's identified as the creator of everything.
All right, so the identity and authority of the lawgiver are firmly established. Now we get to the laws themselves. This is the heart of the covenant, the terms of the relationship between this powerful God and his brand new nation.
You can really think about the Ten Commandments as being split into two main categories. The first four are all about the relationship between the people and God. Have no other gods, don't make idols, respect his name, and set aside a holy day. Then the next six are all about the relationships between people, upholding family, protecting life, marriage, property, and your reputation. It covers both the vertical and horizontal dimensions of life.
But the law doesn't just stop at those 10. The source text immediately gives more instructions that build on these core principles, giving a little more specific shape to how this new society should actually operate.
For instance, we get some very specific rules about worship. Altars have to be simple, made of plain earth or uncut stone so they're not polluted by human tools. There's even a rule about not using steps for altars to ensure modesty. It all reinforces that bigger point from the commandments. Don't make gods of silver or gold. Keep it simple and focused.
Now, this is really important to point out. We need to talk about what isn't in this section of the text. We've got rules for justice, for worship, for how to treat your neighbor, but there's a huge absence. In this foundational legal code given at Sinai, there are 0 specific dietary laws. No food rules are detailed here at all.
So let's pull it all together. What we're seeing is that this nation's entire legal and social structure is built on two very distinct pillars. On one side, you've got Jethro's counsel. It comes from human wisdom, it's practical, and its goal is efficiency and peace. On the other side, you've got God's commands. They come from divine revelation, they're absolute, and their goal is to create a holy nation bound by a covenant.
And this leaves us with a fascinating and, frankly, timeless question. The text presents these two sources of law, the practical and the divine, as working together perfectly to build this new society. But it raises a huge question. What happens when they don't? What happens when what's practical and efficient runs headfirst into a conflict with what is commanded as holy? That's a tension that echoes far, far beyond the wilderness of Sinai.